I'm Chris.Hamilton, Head of Life Sciences for Rogers Burnson. I'm joined today by Tom Keith-Roach, President of AstraZeneca UK. Tom, thanks so much for agreeing to contribute to our next edition of Observe magazine, the theme of which is the Great Reset, and it won't surprise you to know it focuses on the many challenges that businesses and business leaders are facing in the short-term and the long-term response to COVID-19. So perhaps before we launch into the discussion, let me give a brief introduction. I think it's fair to say your current role is just one in a series of amazing and challenging, exciting leadership opportunities. You began life in the British Army, you then became a management consultant and an investor in early stage technology. You're now 20 years into your career with AstraZeneca, which has included running businesses in Asia Pacific, in Eastern Europe, as global head of the blockbuster Brilinta franchise, and then, of course, most recently, running AZ's global respiratory and immunology business. I mean, these are all amazing leadership roles. They've taken you into developing and developed markets around the world. So how does it now feel being here running the UK business at this crucial time, and especially because AZ is so much at the heart of the UK government's response to the COVID-19 crisis?
Great. Hi, Chris. Well, firstly, thanks very much for inviting me to join you and try to address this question. Certainly, it's been a bit of an otherworldly experience joining the UK team whilst not being able to really connect with any of our customers or team members face to face, which would have been in normal circumstances probably the majority of how I would have spent my first 3 months. But at the same time, it's been a real privilege. I think in healthcare, we're in a fortunate position relative to those in some other industries. And whilst other industries have slowed down in many ways, our challenge has been how to accelerate what we do, albeit working in a virtual environment. And for us at AstraZeneca, that has meant accelerating our contribution as part of the national effort to combat COVID-19, particularly on vaccines development and testing. As you know, AstraZeneca is the UK's leading life sciences company. We have an extremely strong UK investment and physical footprint right the way across the value chain. And so the pandemic has been an opportunity for us to roll up our sleeves and work to contribute toward that national effort in whatever way that we feel that we can. It's also been a great opportunity for me to build relationships and accelerate our collaboration with all of our stakeholders in the UK government, but also the NHS, supply chain partners, patient organisations, NGOs, competitors. And it's fantastic to feel that we're all playing together for the same team. The competition here clearly is the virus, and that's allowed us to coordinate and move extremely fast at scale in ways that would have been difficult, I think, under normal circumstances. And of course, we're accelerating innovation. Our business model and how healthcare is delivered in the UK, is still really stuck in the 20th century. And I think this crisis has given really strong impetus to jumping our model and how healthcare will be delivered, I think, in the future very firmly into the 21st century. I think we've made more progress in the last 10 weeks, adopting technology, sharing and using data, transitioning toward virtual consultations, remote monitoring, than we have in any other similar time period. And I think the approaches we take in the future, for example, to managing chronic conditions in this country, I hope and should never go back. So although it's been an unusual start, I guess you could also say that I've had the opportunity to experience the company operating at its absolute best. I think our leadership has been bold and clear thinking, and I fully expect that AstraZeneca will emerge from this crisis as an even stronger organisation than the one that went in.
Picking up on something you've said, Tom, I mean, that is so interesting, isn't it? The rate of change over the last 10 weeks, I mean, some would say probably healthcare has moved further forward in 10 weeks than it perhaps has in 10, maybe even 15, 20 years. So do you now feel we are on a trajectory which will see kind of almost inevitable ongoing in innovation and transformation? Or is a part of you skeptical that actually once we're over the hump of this crisis, it's going to be quite easy to get back to business as usual?
Well, I'm an optimist, Chris. So, I'm a big believer in what this industry is capable of and the power of innovation and investment in R&D. But I'm also an activist. I don't think being an optimist, that risks people just sitting back and assuming that we can take for granted that the positive momentum that we've generated over the past few months is just inevitably going to continue. And that's not the case. And I think everybody involved in the industry, in government, and in delivering healthcare need to take some of the lessons and the new routes that we've established together in terms of how we can collaborate to improve the delivery of healthcare on very accelerated timelines and make sure that that's not lost as we move beyond the acute phase of this crisis.
And Tom, let's look at your previous role, because actually running the global respiratory franchise for AstraZeneca, and what experience, insight, skills does a job like that equip you with when you're now facing a challenge that you have today, which of course is running the UK business, but this is a truly global challenge for everyone. So just kind of reflect on that for us.
Well, in some ways, I'm very pleased to be spending this pandemic, this crisis, back in a leadership role, very much on the front line of healthcare delivery. I spent the last 5 years, as you said, Chris, leading our global respiratory and immunology franchise. And that's a role which inevitably involves taking a longer-term strategic view, working right the way across the company at the most senior level, having a think about how the commercial environment's going to evolve, how clinical practice will change, looking at emerging science and setting out for the company a 10-year strategy and investment program with the intention of really transforming how diseases are managed and treated for the long term. And of course, good medicines are available today across our 3 therapy areas, but the role really makes you aware of, beyond existing medicines, what it is we still have to do, working with healthcare professionals, working with scientists and governments to really deliver massive improvements in how we can treat diseases in our core therapy areas. Diseases are still diagnosed late. They're still poorly and inconsistently treated depending on where you live. You still see very low use of data and new technology. And actually, that perspective on how we need to transform for the longer term has been incredibly helpful to me in dealing with the crisis. Because I think, to start with, in the first couple of weeks of dealing with the pandemic, we found ourselves reacting to a short-term agenda to make sure that supply of medicines was coherent and secure, to make sure that the safety of our staff was ensured, the safety of our customers. But beyond those basics, actually, I think through a crisis, there's a very clear need to have a clear fix on the horizon. And what's the destination for the business and for therapy areas? And how do we need to reshape our business now and build the right relationships and partnerships and capabilities to improve care for patients for the longer term? In a sense, that's the opportunity of a crisis. And I really wanted to make sure that we didn't waste it. And that has really helped, I think, to guide us strategically in terms of what kind of business we want to emerge from this eventually once the acute phase of this pandemic has passed. I think probably the second thing I would say is that working in a global role for so long means that you have extremely good relationships and trust across all functions that represent the full pharmaceutical supply chain and at the most senior levels in the company. And actually, AstraZeneca is a 65,000 person organization globally. At some levels, it's very complex. But I think the ability to align and coordinate and lead at great speed, far faster than we normally need to, in terms of adjusting what we do, that trust and those relationships across the business, I think, have been hugely helpful.
So developing that theme a bit further, Tom, the need for global cooperation between the industry and government, I think that is now widely accepted, not least because circumstances have meant it has to be so. But going forward, how do you envisage, therefore, your role as a leader in terms of forging closer relationships between industries and governments? Because actually, it's not necessarily something everyone is equipped to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the UK, I mean, as you probably know, AstraZeneca is embedded really within all parts of the UK's life sciences industry. As I said, right from early scientific discovery through to manufacturing the medicines that reach patients and across the world. And life sciences is one of the real success stories, in my view, in the UK economy. We can still say that in many areas, the UK is still a global leader. And I think we're fortunate in the life sciences industry that there's a formal office for life sciences within government, the Life Sciences Council that brings together industry leaders with the ministers of health, trade, finance, to make sure that as a nation, we have a clear healthcare and life sciences strategy. And that provided, I think, a very strong platform for the type of collaboration which we've needed over the course of the last 10 weeks. But clearly addressing the big questions that face our society over the next 10 years, better healthcare, pandemic response, healthcare system sustainability and resilience, not just to pandemics like this, but also in terms of sustainable funding models, carbon footprint. These are things which individual companies can't achieve on their own. And I think what we've seen through the course of the last couple of months is the potential which we have to address some of those big issues that society faces if we're able to collaborate across the type of silos that traditionally exist in peacetime between government and NGOs and people involved in healthcare delivery and the biopharmaceutical industry. We're clearly far stronger and able to move far faster if we can collaborate against those challenges together. It remains to be seen, as you said, how sustainable that is. Obviously, I think everybody needs to play their part in making sure that the habits and the collaborations which we've established over the last 3 months are maintained. And that's going to require different leadership skills from leaders on all sides. I think we've got to spend more time on the external agenda to make sure we're aware of what our competitors and our partners are capable of. We need clearly to be able to act and decide fast, manage complexity and uncertainty in ways that perhaps we haven't done in the past. And I think to be successful, those are going to start to become core capabilities of leaders, but also companies that can survive these crises and continue to succeed across multiple waves of innovation.
And to bring things back to the UK, I mean, we're talking a lot about partnership. I mean, one of the really big stories, of course, is AstraZeneca's landmark agreement with the University of Oxford to develop a COVID-19 vaccine and to do so at unprecedented pace and scale. I mean, what does this mean, in the sense of the leadership challenges of actually bringing something like this kind of to a successful conclusion? Because we use unprecedented an awful lot at the moment, but I think we can quite nicely apply it to everything about this arrangement.
Well, it has been a fascinating experience, and I have to say, I think our senior leaders within the company, Pascal, but also on the R&D side, led by Mene, have really provided inspiring and extremely strong leadership on this agenda. And what's interesting, in a sense, Chris, is that AstraZeneca is not a vaccines company. And so even internally, there were some early questions as to why we would do this, and also whether we had the capabilities required to be successful in bringing a vaccine to market at unprecedented speed and also unprecedented scale. But when we started to unpick what's really required to do that in terms of capabilities, actually we found that we were very well positioned to help in terms of our global clinical development capability, regulatory capabilities, manufacturing, supply chain, commercial agreements. And of course, we have a very strong presence both in the developed and in the developing world as a pharmaceutical company with truly global footprint and supply chains. And we know how to move fast. So in a sense, it was a case for us of redeploying existing capabilities that we have as a company, but against a very different goal. And in some ways, I think perhaps being new to vaccines has been helpful in a way, because we've been able to challenge the conventional timelines to accelerate delivery. We're going to try and achieve, working in partnership with some of the institutions we've discussed, to try and deliver a vaccine. Hopefully the phase 3 program will deliver, sometime end of August, beginning of September. And we're actually building the global manufacturing capacity, starting to manufacture vaccines now, so that theoretically there's no delay, subject to regulatory approval, between the readout of those studies and being able to supply vaccine into places like the US and Europe and the UK. But also last week, we signed a further collaboration with the Serum Institute of China, which gives us access to another 1 billion doses of manufacturing capacity, with a commitment to supply vaccines to the developing world. And so, I think it's been a real challenge to try and deliver that, but it's building on existing capability, and through collaboration, I think, has brought out the best in the company. And I also think, as you know, this is one of multiple vaccines programs. We're very hopeful that there'll be more than one. In fact, the world needs there to be more than one. And I think, certainly from what we've seen within AstraZeneca, we see a similar, really rapid and bold commitment to finding solutions to this from our partners right the way across the industry.
And Tom, there are obviously specific circumstances driving this the pace behind this program. Mm-hmm. But does part of you think that actually, after all of this has been achieved, there will therefore be a case for the whole world, which says drug discovery, drug development can be done so much quicker and so much more effectively through collaboration? So you therefore start to see a complete unpicking of the whole kind of development and regulatory and launch process, or is that perhaps too much to hope for?
Well, I think, clinical trial protocols and regulatory agencies are there for a reason. And they're there to make sure that the medicines that reach patients are safe and effective. But I do think that what we've experienced in the last 3 months should be a challenge to all of us in really pushing the limits of how we can get innovation to patients faster in areas of critical unmet need. And, it's interesting for us in the UK, looking forward to the next 24 months and Brexit. How do we make MHRA one of the fastest and most effective regulatory agencies in the world? We have to look at what we've experienced working with the MHRA around vaccines and say, how do we make that standard practice to try and accelerate access for British patients to innovation? And obviously that has to happen within sustainable funding models. We need to retire, in my view, older medicines faster to create the capacity to accelerate the adoption of innovation into the system. And I also think how patients consume healthcare is going to change. The UK is no exception, that we built our healthcare systems around physical infrastructure, essentially. Build clinics, build hospitals, fill them full of healthcare professionals, and patients of all flavours across all diseases come and physically get treated in the same infrastructure. I think we're all pretty clear that that's no model for the future, and particularly chronic diseases. If we're talking about access, I would hope that patients are going to have access to better healthcare for chronic conditions, treated outside the physical infrastructure of the current healthcare system, with the ability to complement that with better medicines, with better data, with better technology, patient pathways, and remote monitoring. Surely is something that we also need to work on coming out of the crisis. So I think the access agenda is going to mean both of those things: faster access to innovation, but also the site of care is going to change, and patients, I hope, will have access to better healthcare without having to go to hospital with the inherent risks that COVID-19 has highlighted so clearly.
And are you seeing a shift in people's attitudes towards data sharing to drive some of this kind of collaboration and innovation?
I think certainly in principle, yes. There are lots of challenges associated with data sharing in terms of patient confidentiality. But I think certainly what we've experienced over the last 3 months provides a strong platform. And hopefully that's something we're going to be able to build on in the coming months.
Tom, let's focus on the leadership challenges, which undoubtedly have been many and varied actually for you in the last few months. AstraZeneca has a large workforce in the UK, and of course a big contingent of that workforce is on the commercial side, people who would ordinarily be in and out of hospitals, working with clinicians. How have you approached the whole concept of maintaining, motivating, and inspiring people when ultimately so much of the sector has effectively closed for business? I mean, I think this is one of the big challenges actually for organisations across the sector, isn't it? How do you kind of maintain that level of morale when ultimately your people can't go out and sell and they can't go out and work with their customers?
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see. We have a twice a year annual employee survey, and that's just gone out. And so I'll be fascinated in 2 weeks to see the feedback from our workforce in terms of how they have responded and whether their level of motivation has gone down or up. And, between us friends, my suspicion is that the level of motivation in our workforce has gone up in the last 3 months, not down. Certainly that would be my hope. And I would say that's been a consequence of two things. Firstly, I think that large companies and AstraZeneca have always had an important role to play in not just serving shareholders. I mean, that's one of our stakeholders, but as a responsible contributor toward the broader economy and society in which we are an integral part. And that's always been the case, but I think it's been increasingly true and visible to all of our stakeholders, not least our employees over the last 3 months. And people are feeling immensely proud to be part of what is now Britain's largest global biopharmaceuticals company, and actually over the last 3 weeks became the largest company in the FTSE. We're now FTSE 1. And to see a response that's so clearly consistent with the values that we have as a company, putting patients first and following the science being the two things that we consistently talk to as the things that guide our action. But maybe also, I think there's been a sense within our commercial organisation that we're going to need to modernise our business. I don't think we as an industry have moved fast enough to do that. And this crisis has given us a platform where we've had no choice. We spent the first 2 or 3 weeks deploying new virtual interaction tools, developing new customer content. We spent the next 2 weeks doing training. And we're now in a phase where the expectation is that we're fully back to pre-COVID-19 productivity, operating in a virtual model. And so we've never talked about our reaction to this as shutting down our business, of slowing down the contribution that we can make to improving patient care. And actually, if I look at the rate of interaction between people in our commercial organisation and their customers, it did dip for the first 3 weeks, but now working entirely virtually, we have more contacts with our customers every week than we had before the crisis. And so, I think even once the government lifts some of the current restrictions on lockdown, our business model won't go back to how it was before. I fully expect that we will have a mix of virtual and face-to-face interactions. But I think our people now feel that they've been equipped to operate with their customers in new ways, in ways that in many ways their customers value more than they valued face-to-face interactions pre-crisis. And I think they have a level of confidence that we are actually able to emerge a company better able to meet customers' needs than before the crisis.
Tom, there's a lovely section on your AstraZeneca biography, which I'm just going to read out. It says you are passionate about what leaders can do, confronting reality, solving problems, setting strategy and driving execution, attracting talent, building capability, and unlocking the potential in people and teams. On a personal level, how do you see your own leadership mission changing as a result of this crisis?
I mean, you started by asking me a question about how it had been to take on this job in a crisis. And of course, I wouldn't wish the crisis on any society. It's had a really devastating impact on patients and their families all the way around the world. On the other hand, I do believe that organizations and teams and individuals are often capable of far more than they think they are. And I have a real passion for working externally and internally to try and give people a sense of what's possible and help to guide them toward achieving and contributing more. In some ways, this crisis, I think, has really opened up everybody's eyes in the company just to what's possible. And it opens up some really potentially exciting futures. We're focused on oncology and respiratory and immunology, cardiovascular, renal, metabolism. And now I suppose you could add a fourth therapy area, which is vaccines. We have, in many ways, become a vaccines business over the course of the last 3 months. And I'm just excited about the potential we have across those 4 areas to transform outcomes for patients suffering from terrible diseases. I think as a consequence of this crisis, our ability to collaborate with government in new ways, to re-engineer patient pathways, to accelerate innovation as part of that, if anything, has increased rather than decreased. And so I think, our challenge as a company, but also an opportunity, is to really make sure we learn the lessons of accelerating contribution, accelerating collaboration, accelerating innovation, and moving them out of the short-term response to crisis, and really try and embed them as core elements of how we do business across all of our functions for the longer term.
Tom, let's come to a slightly more personal note down. I mean, this lockdown has been a pretty unique experience for most of us. Reflect for us on what the last few months have been for you, because you've got this enormous day job to do, but you're also a human being. You're a father, and it'll be fascinating to hear how you've kind of managed to pull off leadership and self-care during the 3 months of lockdown. I'm not sure I've managed it, but I'd love to hear how you've done it.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think everybody's experienced it in very different ways. I mean, thank God for work. That's the first thing I would say.
Work and Netflix.
Yeah, we've been talking about what's been a very dynamic and very energizing phase in my career, moving into a new job in a situation like this. And I've been in AstraZeneca for 18 years, so I know the company very well, but I had the opportunity to work with a lot of colleagues in the UK affiliate that I didn't know, and really they've been magnificent. The energy and commitment to what we're trying to do has been fantastic. So that's almost been like therapy for me. The personal side of it, and being isolated at home for so long, I actually have found far more difficult. It's interesting to think about how much of our work we could do remotely in the future. And certainly I think in terms of business travel and my carbon footprint, I'm really going to need to think about what comes back and what doesn't. In fact, I think probably I've found on the business side, working remotely has almost been more productive and more business and task focused than coming into the office. But I think, like a lot of other human beings, we are human, we are social, and we come into the office for lots of different reasons, to build relationships, in a sense beyond task, to think about our personal and professional development. And it's just enriching as human beings to have the chance to interact face to face with colleagues and customers. So I think probably moving forward, I'm going to do far more virtually, but at the same time, I've realised how much I enjoy and how complementary often it is to meet people face to face. And so, I'm here in the Luton office today, approving this site as safe for sort of step-by-step phased return to work, which will start next Monday. And I'm delighted to be talking to you on video, Chris, but I look forward to the chance to meet with you face to face at some time in the not too distant future.
Tom, you've given us some fantastic insights, and you've left us, I think, with some hugely powerful messages. So once again, thank you so much for agreeing to contribute to Observe Magazine.
Cheers, Chris. Thanks for the opportunity.